everyone. My name is Valentina. I'm an Atlas Core Fellow from Bulgaria, class 38, and the chair of the Communication Committee. On behalf of the Communications Committee, I'm proud to launch our new People Power Hour series, where we will be discussing global social issues from a variety of perspectives. The series will take the format of 30 minutes live discussions with Atlas Core alumni and fellows, and we will provide insight into different social issues across the world and how we can all do our part to address them. So in honor of June being Pride Month, today's session will cover LGBTQ+ rights around the world. Stay tuned to learn more about the history of this movement and the situation with LGBTQ+ rights in different countries. Ask your questions in the comments below and feel free to share the situation with LGBTQ+ rights in your country. So what does LGBTQ+ mean? LGBTQ is an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer and questioning. These terms describe a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. Activists began to use the initialism LGBT in the United States in 1988. Before that, different separated groups tried to defend their rights. So, as you know, the main symbol of the LGBTQ+ movement is a rainbow flag. The rainbow flag was popularized as a symbol of the gay community in 1978. The different colors are often associated with diversity in the gay community, and also this flag is commonly used as a general symbol of social equality and individuality. As I already said in the beginning, LGBTQ Pride Month is currently celebrated in June to honor the Stonewall Uprising in Manhattan in 1969. The Stonewall Uprising was a tipping point for the LGBTQ+ movement in the United States. However, the US wasn't pioneer in accepting and improving LGBTQ+ rights. Guess what countries were the first to create sexual orientation protection in their laws? In 1989, Denmark recognized legal relationships of same-sex couple establishing registered partnerships. This was a long journey, and just in 2001, the Netherlands became the first country to establish same-sex marriage by law. Between these two milestones, in 1997, South Africa became the first country to include sexual orientation protections in its constitution. It's still the only African country to legalize same-sex marriage. Let's briefly talk at the current situation with LGBTQ+ rights around the world. At the same time, we encourage you to share the situation in your country in the comments below. As you can see on that map, same-sex marriage is legally performed and recognized in 29 countries around the world. They highlighted dark blue on the map. 19 more countries and territories, they highlighted blue, like this. These countries recognize different types of civil unions, but 71 countries banned homosexuality by the law, including 6 countries effectively imposing the death penalty on same-sexual acts. They highlighted dark brown. So thank you for your attention. Stay tuned and let's talk deeply about the movement for LGBTQ+ rights, defending with our alumni. Hello, Iya. Hello, folks.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, so I guess I will start. Thank you, Valentina, for your presentation, and thanks for everyone who's watching us for staying tuned. It's a very interesting topic for our community. So my name is Iya. I'm an Atlas Core Fellow from Russia, class 34. And I'm here with 4 of our alumni who are working on LGBTQ plus rights as we're launching our new People Power Hour series. And as Valentina said, where we'll be discussing different global social issues. So in honor of June being Pride Month, today's session will focus on the human rights issues of LGBTQ rights around the world. And everyone who's watching, please feel free to leave your questions in the comments and we'll try to cover them on during and after the session. So hello to Shar, Ernesto, Fernanda, and Hassan. So could you please briefly introduce yourself, preferably with 5 Atlas Corps fellow facts, if you can remember them, that basically we definitely want to know what class you're from, country, and what you're currently doing.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Tushar Malik. I am a Class 13 Atlas Corps alumnus, and I served at the Human Rights Campaign with the global team. And I have been working with international LGBTQ rights issues for the past 10, 11 years now, and I'm from India. But I'm currently living in the Netherlands and working with AIDS Funds, which is a HIV/AIDS global funder, and I'm working on a program that's specifically focusing on key populations that includes LGBTQ people, sex workers, people who use drugs, and adults and girls and young women, and raising their advocacy and capacity.
Thank you so much.
Oh, hi everyone, my name is Fernanda. I am an alumni class 22. I served at the Latin American Youth Center in 2016-2017. Currently, I am located in Monterrey, Mexico, which is north part of Mexico, and I am an English teacher and I've got my own school.
That's
Hello.
awesome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ernesto. I'm an Atlas Corps fellow from El Salvador, class 17. I also serve at the Human Rights Campaign. I think actually I was the fellow that followed Tushar in his post at the Human Rights Campaign. I worked with LGBT issues for a while, maybe 5, 6 years. I'm currently doing a master's in human rights at the London School of Economics and Political Science. So I'm currently in London.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hassan Kilani, and I am class 24. I'm the first Atlas Corps fellow from Jordan, and I'm now residing in Jordan and living in Jordan and working as a diversity consultant for different organizations, working on technically the LGBT issues and Suji refugees as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your introduction. And I think we'll go ahead and move to some general questions that I think will be good to, to kind of open this topic, and then we'll see how much time we have and see what questions, our listeners can have. So the first question that we're gonna ask, could you please give us like a short recap of what position the LGBTQ community has in your country as of right now?
Tushar, wanna go first?
I think we can shuffle it up a little bit. Hassan, how about you?
Sure. So the situation in general and in the Middle East is quite conservative, as we know, and as you shown in the map, that most countries, like many countries, not legalizing same-sex relationship, and in some neighboring countries to Jordan, it's the penalty is the death and execution. So in Jordan, it's considered to be a little bit more progressive in terms of legalizing the relationships itself. However, it's still, we face lots of backlashes, especially when we have celebrities who would who try to support or try to have any public voice. And there's always like a public backlashes whenever there is any situation of moving one step forward. So it's quite sensitive, and I leave a space for others to talk. Thank you.
In Mexico specifically, I guess it's always evolving, because one day you can have like really good news about equal marriage, about policies that are being made for the LGBTIQ community, and then the next day you find that there has been some sort of femicide or some sort of hate crime towards mostly trans people. So it's definitely sort of like in the middle sort of situation. There is definitely more people opening right now, I guess, in this age, or nowadays, it's just the most open that we've ever been historically in Mexico. Yet there are still a lot of conservative issues and people, and I think Ernest and I are gonna overlap in a lot of issues here because of the Americas side. There's a lot of people that are conservative and very binary and very pro-family, pro-marriage, that not only invisibilize the LGBTIQ community, but also women and trans women and women of color. So there's a lot of like intersectionality that goes unnoticed within the LGBTIQ community in Mexico, just because of the different identities that we have here. But yeah, I would say that as much as we're trying to move forward, as it is as equally painful as we are going backwards when it comes to hate crimes and still not full acceptance of the LGBTIQ community in Mexico. And a lot of it is also because of the religion, because of the sort of like the traditional values that are just facing our generation because of our parents or grandparents. And also because Mexico is a very macho kind of country, a very man-dominated kind of country. So there's a lot of that goes into the problematics that are inside of the LGBTIQ community.
Hi. Yes, maybe to continue with the Americas. We often hear that the Americas is one of the most unequal regions in the world. Mostly when people are talking about this, they're talking about economic disparities, but it's also the truth in terms of human rights. Like in the whole Americas, even considering the, obviously, the Caribbean regions, we have a rainbow of situations that are happening for LGBT people that go from criminalization in most countries colonized by the British Empire, and we go through places that there's a lot of violence. For example, in Mexico, in Central America, it's a huge concern. Like countries where there's lack of legislations, to countries that are more progressive and have become sort of like barometers for in terms of advancing LGBT rights. Argentina, Uruguay, from example. But there is a whole rainbow. So one of the misconceptions that people have is that the Americas already made it. So sort of like we already have equality, we are over the rainbow now. And I just wanted to point it out that that's not true, of course. And even in the countries where this is the case, this is not always for everyone. As Fernanda has said, women, other minorities are often invisible, or the implementation of the laws doesn't reach everyone. So I just wanted to break with that misconception. And also another misconception is that once you have marriage equality, you made it. This is not true. There's plenty of concerns. Criminalization, violence are pretty much often, in activism terms, the pressing issues that people are working on, including still in the Americas in very different scenarios. So I think that we should start by talking about violence and leave marriage for later in the conversation. Of course, there's always questions about that. Of course, it's a very sensitive issue politically, but there's other like different situations to be an ally and advocate for LGBT rights. Thank you.
I think I'll pick up where Ernesto left off around violence, around discrimination. One of the things that happened in India in 2018 was that we finally had same-sex sexual activity between consenting adults decriminalized. One of the decriminalizations happened in 2009, then it was recriminalized in 2013, and finally the Supreme Court decriminalized it with the principle of non-retrogression. That means no going backwards, especially in terms of human rights. What it did was it did not legalize anything. It just ensured that LGBTQ people were no longer considered to be criminals. And I think that's what we are fighting for in a lot of countries around the world, especially countries where Victorian era statutes around morality were implemented by the British. And I can say that because in India in 1860, when Section 377 was implemented, was the first place in the Commonwealth where this was implemented. And similar statutes exist on the book all across sub-Saharan Africa, in the Caribbean, in different parts of Asia as well, where the British Empire pushed this law. And a lot of other countries are now pushing for the courts to remove this criminalization for same-sex sexual activity between consenting adults, based on the judgment that was in India, which was basically talking about the right to privacy, the right to life, and the right to not be arbitrarily detained, like amongst many other human rights. So in a space where world over LGBTQ people are fighting for their basic rights to just simply exist without violence, without discrimination, without stigma, it is always a bigger fight that we have to fight, first for decriminalization, then for equality, then and protection against hate crimes, against violence, which is a lot of the times also perpetuated by state actors like the police, which is what we are seeing in this global conversation right now. So there's a lot of overlap in civil rights movements. Specifically when it comes to India, India is always very diverse. So we are seeing like a whole wave of, especially the younger generation, which is like, was really surprised that LGBTQ people were ever even criminalized. And they were like, why did this ever happen? So we're seeing that, and we're seeing this at one point, we're talking about human rights of people, and on the other point, we're having other political discourses. But for the sake of this discussion, I'll say that I think we are heading in a good direction, so to say, in terms of our next steps. And especially because of our cultural history of trans, especially trans women's representation, which has been recorded for over 2,000 years. Even though there's been a lot of marginalization, I think that there's a lot more acceptance that is coming through in India. And I will not speak to the rest of Asia because we're so diverse as a continent. So it changes quite a bit, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think lots of you actually brought up a little bit of answers to our next question, but I will still go ahead and ask it to make sure that everyone, has a space to kind of give us more information. Because following up this information, we wanted to ask what rights are LGBTQ communities advocating for in your countries right now? And how are those movements being built and led? Like, who is the moving power in your case?
I'll just continue on because I talked quite a bit about the rights that we're fighting for. And I know that a lot of the panelists also talked about it. But one of the major things that has also been happening is, okay, we got decriminalization, what next? So are we working towards anti-discrimination in all aspects of life? Because that is super important to ensure that our rights are maintained. Are we talking about basic acceptance in society? Are we are definitely, we have a strong movement for the rights of the third gender individuals or transgender and non-binary individuals, which has been a very strong movement, which is like, even though I think the challenge in India at this point is what the Supreme Court says, which is really progressive versus what the parliament does with it, which is not progressive. So here the courts are saying we need to have stronger protections and affirmative action for people of a third gender or non-binary people and trans people. And in those commissions and trying to like build what does this look like in the policy making, none of the people are involved. So there's all of these decisions that have been taken without keeping the populations in consideration or without involving them in those decision making. And I think that's where we are at in India, is to really have our voices be heard at these tables and for us to be part of these decisions that are being made.
You want to go, Ernest?
Okay.
Go.
Okay, yeah, in the case of El Salvador, so right now it's one of the most violent countries in the Americas. So right now people are working towards creating cultural acceptance. We have hate crime legislation. It's been into place for a while now, but it's not implemented. So like having it written on the laws is not a guarantee that there will be cultural change. And it's not a guarantee that there will be prosecutions and that there will be less murders. Particularly, transgender women are affected by hate crimes because they are more visual. And it's also one of the reasons why I think that a big part of the LGBT movement in El Salvador is led by trans women, actually, and more recently trans men as well. There's also obviously like gay men and lesbian women organizations, and the priorities are all divided between different issues. But some of the other pressing concerns, there's been some legal challenges to the prohibition on same-sex marriage in El Salvador. Also, that has been very, 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 very delayed by the courts into even accepting the case. So, and with COVID now, we really don't know what's going to happen. But the pressing issue in El Salvador is still violence and how to get the government to act upon that violence. Thank you.
Yeah, just to continue with the Americas, as you say, Ernest. In Mexico, I guess every single year we have a different cause, and because we have all divided priorities too. Because of our government, it depends on what stance do they take to towards LGBTIQ rights. So, for example, our former president did do some amazing things when it comes to marriage equality and recognizing LGBT people, but this new president is kind of dull and not the best person at taking a stance in something. So when it comes to our rights, lately, I guess our pressing concerns have been trans women and women of color, or trans women of color within the movement. There's definitely a lot of homophobia and misogyny, even within our own communities, due to the context of our country. A lot of the activism falls into local people, projects, organizations, and not really on government policy until they are being pressed on to take a stance or to do something about it. And lately, I guess, probably I would say these last 2 years, the two main things that were highlighted for us were, one, conversion therapies, because also we have like public personalities that are going on television saying like conversion therapies are okay, and like you need to go to like camps that are gonna cure you from being homosexual and things like that. So it's really awful because you know, everyone has a television in Mexico, well, most of the people, and you know, you get with your family together for lunch or dinner or whatever, and then you see these people telling your kids or telling very conservative parents, you know, it's okay that you send them to a camp to cure them. So gay conversion therapy has been a very challenging thing to deal with in Mexico. And the second thing I would say is the hate crimes and the violence toward trans women, because of the femicides in Mexico, and trans women coming out saying, you know what, I'm also a woman, and I believe myself to be a woman, and I feel like this type of way, they also are like considered collateral damage in Mexico because they're not really biological women. So they get killed because of trying to be who they are openly in Mexico.
So in Jordan, we have lots of things in common, and we need to say that in general, like hate and ignorance from the majority of the society is, I think, something around the world. However, even though in Jordan, since 1952, we have legalized we have removed this penalty, but still we have issues when it comes to transgender community, when it comes to their essential lives, such as access to work or access to health or access to housing. Like we're talking about very basic rights for every human being to be able to, to have the rights when they find a job, that if there was a spaces that accepting a transgender person to work in our conservative country, it would be extremely limited, as well as in housing and access to health. So the whole acceptance for the transgender community or the LGBT community as a whole, it's something extremely privileged. You need to live in like West Amman, like in the very much the privileged area of the city. However, it's still, you will get paid as literally where you cannot survive to live in these areas where you can be tolerated. So fighting in Jordan, specifically fighting for this essentials, is very important for us. And I have a small note here. I was very surprised that in America, they just, like put like a law that discriminate or against discrimination of LGBT persons and workplaces. I was so surprised because I feel that this is way more important than legalizing gay marriage or legalizing the marriage. I feel like have protection in your workplace, have protection for your housing, have protection for your essential is something really important. And to put first the gay marriage, it's something extremely elite and privileged kind of proposing laws. So, and that's where we are here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for, covering. I know this topic is very wide and we've already even covered that even inside the movement, there are so many issues and different sides, which I think lots of people usually think of LGBTQ plus just as, gay and lesbian, while there's so much more. And unfortunately, some of the minorities definitely fall out of the discussion, even inside of the movement. So, but I'm very glad to hear that there are already some, some success stories, while I also recognize that at the same time, like one year you do one step forward and next year it's possible to roll back, which I think like one of the questions that we wanted to also ask you about this relationship that LGBTQ rights and just communities, the movement has with your government and religious institutions. Like, would you say it still has, a lot of, like those institutions have a lot of weight on how the movement's ability to, grow and expand?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm gonna start like, I think this is the same for all the countries that are really big. So for example, in Mexico, it depends on where you live, the sort of way people think. Like there are places that are very conservative, or there are very big cities that are still conservative, or that are more open. People would say that the capital, Mexico City, it's more open. And yes, it is, but still they have their challenges and they still face the same issues that the rest of the country does. I'm gonna speak about my city, Monterrey. We are one of the biggest cities in Mexico, and Nuevo León is one of the most important states in Mexico. And still we are like leaders in femicides, violence, crime, a lot of homophobia, and definitely conservative things. So religion is part of like our daily lives, and it's sort of like something that I guess even before you're born, you already know what religion you're gonna have. It's like something that comes really, really close to being Mexican. That's number one. And number two, we have like this movement lately in the Congress in Monterrey, or the Congress in Nuevo León, that it's not called gender theory, or it's not LGBTQ rights, it's gender ideology, and it's something that you're trying to impose on children. So there's like congressmen and congresswomen fighting for the right to decide the education of their children, and they do like protest, pro-family, pro-marriage, against gender ideology, because you're only imposing children to be biased and confused about who they are, and you're not reinforcing them the binary gender stereotype of like you are either blue or you are pink. There's nothing else for you. So there's even this bill draft a congressman did called the parental pin, that gives sort of like the restriction pin that you put on the internet, that gives the restriction to parents to go to their schools, like whether they're public or private, to say, you know what, my children are being taught sexuality, my children are being taught gender ideology, and I do not agree with that, and my religion doesn't really accept that, so I'm gonna take my children out of your school, kind of thing. So it is very challenging. Nuevo León just in the last year legalized, but like fully legalized equal marriage, but it wasn't really there like for I would say like at least 5 years. We were just trying to fight our right to get married in Nuevo León, and we couldn't until people were like, yeah, well, you know what, yeah, we're gonna start doing like solidarization and like LGBT rights here, and everybody started like, it's called pink washing things, when you sort of like present yourself as an ally but you really aren't. So the Congress did that, and they ultimately legalized getting married in Nuevo León, but still, you have to fight for your right to get the social security of your partner, the same rights as your partner. If you have children, are they legally your children, or are they not legally your children because you didn't have them? And that sort of thing, we're still going baby steps when it comes to the government, and with just in general in Mexico, with the separation between state and religion. It's a very challenging topic here. Thank you.
I think it's very interesting that you asked about religion and about government, because we're having major challenges with that in India right now. We have a right-wing Hindu nationalistic government in power, and I think one of the biggest things that a lot of religious zealots would like in India keep on saying is that, but Hinduism has nothing against LGBTQ people. We don't have it in the scriptures. And yet there's so much hatred and anti-LGBTQ, especially anti-trans, anti-femme, thoughts in there. And it's more of a cultural thing. It's so based on gender-based violence. It is so based on a machismo culture, which comes in so many different forms. And then the other thing that we're facing right now is this huge wave of Islamophobia. And then, it gets really complicated, because a lot of people are like, oh, but Islam bans homosexuality. That's why we need to throw these people out or disenfranchise them. And I'm like, wow, this is again, sort of, as Fernanda said, it's another sort of pinkwashing, while at the same time, you're so conservative within that religion that you're not even allowing people to. So for a so-called religion of peace, there's a lot of violence that has been happening, even right before the COVID crisis. That was one of the biggest stories that was coming out of India. So we are going through a period of time in India right now where it is so divided, because the majority from a certain religion supports a very autocratic way of governance. And in that kind of a framework, the ones who always suffer are the minorities, whether that is religious minorities, sexual minorities, women, trans people, third gender individuals. There is a lot of othering that is happening. And there's also this quest of what is being a good Indian. And again, that feeds into this idea, this mindset of this is Indian values and these are not Indian values. And I really want to, in our attempt to decolonize, we were hoping to go towards, okay, Indian values are towards inclusion, towards welcoming the guests. It's towards having a diverse society. But instead it's going towards, this is our monolithic identity. This is the only way. The only thing that can exist is man, woman. And I am really concerned about that. But at the same time, I'm really hopeful, because I see a lot of young people especially people in our generation who are speaking up, who are finally, like utilizing all the platforms they have, and not just to out into the internet void, but also within their communities, within their families, especially because we're very conservative, family oriented that well. And unless these conversations, whether it is about violence against minorities, whether it is about LGBTQ issues, whether it's about gender-based violence or just gendered issues, like we need to really start that off at the family level and address that, or about racism or colorism, which is a huge topic right now and is making people really think about it. And I think we're at the stage where the conversation has started and people are still in denial. But I'm really hopeful that all the fantastic civil rights movements that are happening around the world, which are all fighting for everyone's individual right to exist the way that they are, in their true identity, in their true format, whatever that is, like just the right to a person's individuality is at stake right now. And I'm really glad that a lot of people are taking that up, and it's become a household issue that cannot be ignored anymore.
Yeah, does anyone want to go ahead and add more on the topic of government and religious institutions and LGBTQ community going together?
So if I may add a little bit, because sometimes there is, as you mentioned, Tushar, that there is lots of conversations around, Islam and LGBTQ related issues. What I really, it's sometimes sensitive, and sometimes it's really, if you don't know, then, usually in general, I prefer to people to not to talk about it, because sometimes they tell you this is a hatred, this is a religion that it's hatred. And after all, when I am somewhere around the world, people will hate me because I am a Muslim. So the hate will come anyway for the person, whoever, if it was, Muslim or LGBT or et cetera, et cetera. And also the assumptions. However, what I want to say is, I do think Islam is like any other religions, has different interpretations, and all different interpretations, people take whatever they believe and leave whatever they think. Many people are believing in a progressive way and have interpretations that is very progressive interpretation that is really saying that God mercy is inclusive and God is loving everyone, and all of these values about God and love and tolerance and acceptance, it's exactly as it is in Islam as well. And at the same time, there are some political leaders who, as we call them, fundamental Islamists, would love, they like to take the actual LGBT related issues to gain some publicity for their votes when they go into the parliament. So you hear them every 4 years in the same time fighting different issues, LGBT issues, women's rights issues, feminism, many issues that where they can gain as much as possible of the votes and of this, conservative community. So, but in general, we believe as an activist, we need to also make sure that we are there not to make interpretation, but to remind of these values of acceptance. And at least I'm talking about in my country, where we literally all what we asking for, as I mentioned, in our rights, and all of it's related to show acceptance, show inclusion, and that is not, we are not asking for any more than that kind of recognition, because it's really important also in general to know that each fight or each path is different. Just because in the West that they have certain paths, that doesn't mean we need to follow these paths. We have our own life, we have our own rights, we have our own, like how we deal with it and how we understand it, and our context is different. And for now, it's just reminding everyone that this is really important and inclusive, and also reminding our governments that they are there to protect all citizens despite their backgrounds. And that is the relationship right now in my country.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think it's a very important topic to also break with the stereotype that you cannot be LGBT and have a religion, or that you should be against religions, or that all religions are against LGBT issues or human rights or women's issues. I know in the case of El Salvador, the majority of the two biggest churches as institutions are not pro-LGBT, but there's thousands of people from different faiths that are allies or that are LGBT themselves. And there are some smaller churches that are quite progressive. And this is one of the things that I learned in DC as an Atlas Fellow. I was lucky enough to be there, and it's sort of like one of the gayest cities that I lived in. So there's communities for everyone. So I joined, like the happy hours with churches, and I learned how to make connections and alliances and work for activism and human rights with religious institutions and with religious leaders. And those networks exist all over the world. When we posted that we were going to talk about this, I saw a couple of friends that we have in common with Tushar and Hassan, who's been working on field of faith and inclusion, talking about how they thought this panel was a great idea. And there's like in every country, even if they're not the biggest churches or the most visual ones, there will always be welcoming spaces. And I think it's important, if it's safe for you as an activist or an advocate, to try to build alliances if that's something that you're interested in, and that you don't have to struggle with the conflict of like, I'm betraying my queer brothers, sisters, because I still have a faith. Like I consider myself a questioning Catholic, now that you mentioned the Q at the beginning, because I question a lot of the politics of the church, but still is part of my identity. I was raised Catholic and I still consider myself sort of Catholicish.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And I'm glad that it did come up in our conversation that being LGBTQ plus ally or representative doesn't mean you're against something. You're just adding up and expanding already existing culture. Again, it's because I'm myself from Russia, and lots of people have this weird idea that it's something Western that comes to your country in order to break your values or break your identity, which it doesn't mean, of course, at all. And I think it's great that once again we said that it's not like someone's trying to fight already existing life, but just wants to give more love and acceptance. And I think that is why I will follow up with a question: why do you think people are so sensitive about this issue, and what we can do, like each of us, any fellow, and even the fellows, especially those who feel sensitive about this? What would your advice be to, let people to open their hearts and open their mind towards LGBTQ plus communities, and anyone who wants to support and kind of shift this, stigma about it towards acceptance?
I would say, if I can go first, I would say that talk to each other. There's like a really good exercise that you talk about where you try to think about how inclusive you are in your closest group. And it's about think about, if you're a fellow, think about the 5 fellows that you're most closest to, and how similar to you they are. Because they probably are very similar. They're either from your same country, region, or you live on the same house. But then try to think about those who are a little bit different than you, or people that you've never met, and try to talk to them. Try to be, closer to them. I know that as a fellow and as a gay man, maybe sometimes I was very hesitant from talking to people from countries that have their reputation of being very homophobic. And I missed a lot of opportunities talking to people. I would say maybe I did not talk to that many Russian fellows, but because you just assume that people think a certain way, but without actually talking to them, without actually connecting them, there's no way of knowing. And I think that one of the purposes of the fellowship is to build this community. And if you don't talk to each other, you will never know.
I do think that since this GLL started virtually, so it's going to be a little bit harder to make, these new fellows who's located now in their home countries, it's a little bit challenging. But from my own experience, honestly, I was so happy to meet people that they told me this is the first time they talked about LGBT issues, and seeing people openly and having this conversation. Maybe they've been in the West before, but all what they've seen is maybe people hanging out, the pride when, you know, like you look in Europe and like people are almost, you know, wearing nothing and dancing. And that's not what it is about being an LGBT. It's about the struggles. It's about, you know, it's about things in your life that it's attached to your identity, that constant makes you feel there is a struggle. And a lot of times that I met women, especially from, you know, surrounding countries, from Arabic countries that came as an Atlas Core fellows, and they were telling me, oh my God, like what you have been facing or what you faced is exactly what we faced. We start to see that there is lots of comments. We start to look at, oh yes, there is a patriarchal system. There is lots of ways of talking about it, not just like telling them, oh, this is the flag, this is America. I mean, it is an approach. I'm not saying that it's not an approach, but I feel like the fellows from each other, they need to open these communications. Especially for me, I felt this kind of responsibility because in the time that I attended GLLs, that there was lots of people from, you know, West Bank, from Gaza, that these people live under the Israeli oppressions and Israeli, you know, like occupation. So therefore they never like easily left their countries. So they didn't talk to other people. They didn't really, you know, get the whole knowledge about LGBT issues. So I felt like, yeah, I need to tell you that this is here we are. This is, you know, the situation. And this is the Middle Eastern, Jordanian, Palestinian context outside of occupation. Thank you.
I would definitely agree that one of the greatest things about Atlas Core is that you get to have people from all over the world next to you, like sitting next to you. That makes a lot of difference, because imagine that you grow up in a very liberal family or in a very conservative family, and that's all you ever know until you go out in the world and you meet other people and you meet like different ways of living. And it's really different from Googling to having actually someone from that country talking to you about their experience, and all these, even all these stereotypes that you find on the internet about people from El Salvador or Jordan or India or Mexico. So I would say that, and getting a bit existential here, if you consider the human being to be just that, just a human being, we are so diverse in our own nature that sometimes we don't even finish knowing our own selves. So the fact that you just label someone and put them in a box and say like, oh, well, you are this religion, you are this orientation, you are this beliefs, you are right wing, left wing, or any other sort of label, then you just kind of like set them up for a specific spectrum in your life, I would say. So I would recommend for everyone that is doing the fellowship right now, or that is an alumni, that connecting with people and talking to them like without any sort of with any sort of prejudice, just sort of like straight up, you know what, I have these questions, I have these stereotypes, I have this sort of beliefs about you, about your religion, about who you are as a person. Obviously, if you go out in the world and you meet people from different places or different ideologies, you're going to be able to expand your mind. And at the end of the day, all the labels and all the structures that are attached to your identity can always be deconstructed. And you can always make new opinions, and you can always have new beliefs. Like, it is okay for you to have information about things, or, you know, just sort of meet other people and be like, oh, well, you know what, I have Muslim gay people that are my friends, or trans women that are Catholic. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, we're all just, you know, human beings. And a lot of the things that we identify ourselves with can always be changed and can always be deconstructed. And sometimes we just say like, oh, well, you know what, you are Republican or you are Democrat, so that's why we're never going to get together and we're never going to be able to have a friendship. Or, you know what, I don't really like people from your country because they did this to mine 1,000 years ago, and things like that. So it is just something that you can always challenge, and it's something personal for yourself. You know, like, definitely just sort of say like, you know what, this is not the kind of person that I want to be. And if you are in a fellowship living in Washington, D.C. or in any place in the United States that allow you to go global and to open your mind, that's amazing, and definitely take advantage of that opportunity.
I love what everyone has said already, and there's not really much to add, but specifically on the idea of why people are afraid or to have these conversations, there's two parts of that. One is the idea that people have not been given the opportunity to, a lot of people, and I will say this for, especially with a lot of the fellows, when I had these conversations, not everyone gets the opportunity to just be who they are. And a lot of the times this idea that, oh, you know, you can be who you are or it gets better in the West. And that's not the idea we're trying to promote here. We're trying to say it is important to have these conversations in your home countries, in your places, within your friends, and just really start talking about this, because the point is that we need to create that environment everywhere around the world for people who are different, for people who are not conforming to what you believe in or what you think about, for them to feel comfortable enough to think that they can talk to you. And it is with this human connection that you open up the world. And for fellow queer people around the world, I would just say that let's not subscribe to the cancel culture. Let's still be out there, because there are a lot of people who are not homophobic, transphobic, queerphobic. They just don't know whether it is okay to ask a question, and they have no way to figure that out. Like, I mean, you can read online as much as you want, but at some point we need to meet midway and to be like, yes, absolutely, ask me that question. And I think that was the best part about being at Atlas Core, was for me to learn about other people and what they think and what their cultures thought, as opposed to what I see on a map with the legislation. In fact, we've got so many fellows from Sudan and South Sudan, and we've got, like, I mean, Sudan has LGBT same-sex relations criminalized and punishable by death. I think it's still on the books there. And some of my favorite people in the fellowship were Sudanese fellows, and I wouldn't have had that experience had I just thought, oh, this is a country that does this. But the country and the government and the politics are very different from the people. And sometimes all you need to do is just have that person-to-person connection. And I think that that's what a place like Atlas Core, like an experience, an opportunity like this, can give to, you know, a globalized world like ours, for us to be able to make those connections, for us to be able to be like, hey, can we talk? I don't know whether this is okay, but I want to ask this, and for us to say, yeah, absolutely, we're here for each other. Let's talk. And that is, I think, the activism that I can see all my other panelists nodding. No, that is the activism that we want to see in the world. And so it's just, we need to really encourage that a lot more.
Yeah, I definitely couldn't agree more about talking and just, I mean, even challenging, because I understand that people who come already like with a feeling that they're against this movement, it's difficult. Like, why do I need to ask if, you know, it's not something that I believe is right? But I think it's always great idea to challenge yourself and make sure that you at least try to hear different points, because I personally follow like different political, you know, personas online that I disagree with, just to keep myself, you know, on my tiptoes and know what the other side operates with, because that's how you build, you know, diplomacy and talking and, you know, just connecting and making sure that you do really understand what's going on. So it's great. Just for the sake of time, I will move to some questions that we got on our comment session on Facebook Live. So the first question that we got is, how has COVID-19 affected the advancement of LGBTQ rights, or what do LGBTQ plus rights look like in a post-COVID context? Do you think it, like, you know, changed the dynamics?
I think one of the biggest things that we are seeing, especially like working with vulnerable communities, like in my current role, but also like in a more personal role, having conversations with fellow queer activists, one of the biggest challenges with this lockdown has been the lack of safe spaces for a lot of people. So the kind of homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia that exists in the world, some people have had to go back into toxic environments with parents or family who are not supportive. And it has definitely led to an increase in violence or, just a lot of mental anguish and stress. And that can be really challenging. And I think it really speaks to how much space we give to people's own identities. And I mean, sure, you can go somewhere and be who you are or be independent, but in such a situation where you're forced to, like, maybe some people have lost jobs as well, and for a lot of more vulnerable people, especially people who have been kicked out for being queer, for being trans, especially for a lot of trans people around the world who are on the streets, who don't have places to go, for them to end up in more difficult situations, it is only increasing violence. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is trying to reach out, trying to see if there's support that can be given to people like that, because it can be toxic sometimes. So part of it is, of course, ensuring that our peers are okay, but also part of it is to ensure that there are allies around the world, as well as peers who are there to support people who are in such difficult or toxic situations.
Okay, does anyone else want to comment on this?
I would say also something really big is health services. Just in our normal life, for LGBTIQ people, it's very challenging to go to the doctor, to receive the health services that they deserve, especially if you are a trans person, a queer person, or if you face discrimination just because of your orientation, where you sometimes are not even allowed to donate blood or things like that. So COVID-19 has made everything more difficult in the health department, and also for people that are dealing with diseases or chronic illnesses. It's harder for them to also, like, on top of that, being LGBT and trying to get your medicines. So that is, the health department is definitely something really, really challenging, especially for trans people. And the fact that also in our normal life, it is quite, well, it's not the most welcoming environment yet to get a job or to go to a company and, being an openly LGBTIQ person. So definitely the pandemic and the stopped the entire economy in the world, I would say. And it is difficult for people that have to do jobs that are not specifically in a company, or people who are doing sexual services as a way to survive in life. Definitely the pandemic made it way more difficult for them to survive and to just get by day by day.
If I may add, in Jordan specifically, that many transgender persons, as we said, they have the challenges to have access to work. So what they do, they work from home. They're doing tailoring. They are making accessories, making, food services, cooking at home. So all these basic and essential deliverable work that you don't need to face discrimination in a workplace. And technically, since Jordan was one of the most restricted countries in the world in terms of, having full curfew, not allowing people to work, not, like everything turns into work from home, many people who work from home, and include the transgenders one, that they've been, like totally banned from any kind of income, and they have no accessibility for income. And unfortunately, they didn't have, the right to even have asking for example, for governmental support, because it's still, they still see this gap that we are not part of a family. We don't have responsibility. They don't look at us as, as vulnerable enough to have financial assistance in terms of, like, due to what happened to us during the restriction. So that is really making lots of people are more in risk to have evictions from their houses, which means more homelessness among the transgender community, which is the majority of them are already facing this facing homelessness in Jordan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering this question. And again, I'll just be quickly kind of wrapping up as in, giving last kind of questions. There is one more question that our fellow is asking, which I think is pretty good to kind of wrap it up. And, so they're asking, what was the biggest challenge to you? I'm assuming in general, if you do, you are part of LGBTQ community representative or in your work, what was the issue? And just from myself, I'll add, if you have some success stories, some positive stories from your life, or again, your movements in your countries, feel free to also add it. And I think after that, we will also just once again, we'll tell how to find you for those people who would like to, to talk more after session with you.
Yeah, I think that, well, for me, I think like personally, it was, and I will try to connect this with Atlas Core as well, because for me, it was one of the first experiences where I was able to be open at work. So in El Salvador, I was, but I was also like the only gay person at my office. They were accepting, but I felt like this distance, this sort of like distance with my colleagues. But working at in Washington D.C. on an LGBT rights organization, it was a learning experience professionally and personally for me. It was an experience of growth. It encouraged me to continue working on specifically on LGBT issues, because before I thought I'm going to have to conform to doing my regular job, working on a bank or whatever, and then do my activism on the other side for free. But you can actually like become a professional, and I thought that this could be a career path for me. And I don't think I would have been able to discover that earlier on without the fellowship. So it was, yeah.
I would say that the biggest thing for me was before coming out, I was engaged. So I broke off an engagement to come out. But that's not the important part. The important part is after, like, there was this day when I just sort of like was talking to myself, and I say, well, I can choose either being this great woman that is going to be successful and that's going to have a good life, and she is going to be like openly gay against everything and everyone, and that is very challenging in Mexico. Being a woman and being gay is just like, well, lesbian is just a lot. So I was like, okay, so am I going to be like this person after a lot of things that have happened in my life, or am I going to be someone that is just gonna like, mind my own business, stay in the closet, or which is completely fine if you want to do that, and just not telling anyone anything, just keep on going with my life, and whatever happens. So that was one of the most challenging things, but it was definitely the moment where my life changed, because I decided not to make who I am a burden for my own self. I decided to make it something that is always going to be part of me, and that is a blessing, and that is something that I get to be proud of against the entire world, if that's the case. So I've had really a very good professional career. I've had amazing experiences such as the fellowship, and I would have never had that without me being openly lesbian. So yeah.
I think one of the funny things about India that is also used as a big case study in diversity and inclusion is that people prefer to be out at work than at home. So people are in the closet with their families, but they are part of queer networks at workplaces. So, and I was working in a little bit of diversity and inclusion quite a few years ago back in India. And we were saying that these safe spaces, people consider the office as a safe space where they can truly bring themselves there, but because family units are so close-knit and so conservative, it is really difficult for people to come out, as well as society. And I feel that that is probably still very much the case in a place like India. And where it is like, yeah, sure, you do whatever you're doing as long as nothing comes out in the papers or none of the neighbors get to know, that's okay, just keep it under wraps. And it's honestly, at some point, it's about whether the environment is conducive enough for you to be openly out and proud, or your being openly out and proud pushes the environment to do that for you. And it's always a very interesting like back and forth that you have to walk. And depending on your country and your context, it might change quite a bit. But I definitely feel that it was obviously easier for me because I've been working in queer rights or associated human rights work. But if it's possible, it's always much better to like not have the burden of being in the closet, having this thing in your mind constantly, what if someone finds out? And it just makes life much easier. It's like a lot less drama, a lot less lying, a lot less thinking about which were the things that I told this person and that person. It's just an easier, stress-free life. It definitely causes more anxiety in a lot of places around, you know, whether your job is secure, whether you have the rights and the protections to bring your true self to the office. But for people who are watching it or listening in, I would say that to the maximum of your current environment and context, you should totally be as true as possible to your identity as much as you can while being safe.
So if I would remember a story or a challenge I faced myself when I was studying in the university, I had to also work in a small hotel, which is in my university neighborhood, which, you know, most of us understand the situation. And I remember I faced lots of harassment due to the way I look, to the way I present myself, to the way I dress up or talk. And I really, after a short while, I wanted to quit. So I talked to my supervisor and I told her I want to quit. And I didn't want to talk about the harassment because you are, as a man in our society, you cannot talk about harassment. You can't say, oh, I'm leaving this place because my colleagues are sexually harassing me. And from one to another, she wanted to know more. And then she brought it up. She said, like, I do believe that I heard some rumors about like harassment and discrimination. And then here she herself, she didn't understand what LGBT means. She never met a gay person in her life. She haven't met anyone, but herself, she faced lots of issues around being women in a workplace as well in Jordan. And especially like coming from a very conservative background herself. And what is really was very happy that after she heard what I told her around sexual harassment and around discrimination, she herself like advocated for a code of conduct bill, and she was, you know, making everyone signing this code of conduct. Is not only like against colleagues but also against customers. So if there's any discrimination in the hotels in general, that every staff would be accountable. And it was really, for me, a very successful story very early on, knowing that if you speak up, if you advocate for your right, you can make a change and you can address bills. That when I was only 18 years old. And thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm very happy that also the fellowship and just getting in touch with people, and just in your countries, even before the fellowship, you had those positive movements, which again just warms my heart to see that there are steps being made forward and that new generations are more open-minded. We will be finishing our session, but I'm sure so many people, and again, I just want to say that people in comments saying that, you know, they're listening and they're in awe and very proud of everybody. And I know that I can tell that some people would love to join in more of conversation with you and maybe have discussion. And I know that some people, since it's such a sensitive topic, lots of people don't go publicly asking questions. So if you could just comment quickly before we log off, if it's okay to get in touch with you and how people can find you, and if you have any, again, useful links, or for maybe people of LGBTQ plus who, you know, looking for support, please feel free to share. But thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for moderating the panel. I think personally for me, so my name is Tushar Malik, TUSHAR MALIK, and you can contact me on LinkedIn, or if you feel better sending a anonymous email, it's Tushar, my first name, .malik @atlascorp.org, which is our fellowship organization. So if you forget that, just look at the website. It's very simple, first name last name @atlascorp.org, and absolutely welcoming any messages or feedback or comments, or if someone wants to talk. And then secondly, if you are listening to this and you are in need of help or support from any organizations and you don't know who to talk to or who to turn to, check out ILGA, ILGA.org, which is the International LGBTQ Association. They have a list of a lot of contacts of all the LGBTQ related organizations around the world. So even if you don't see something listed on their website, be assured that there's still people working in your country towards the rights of LGBTQ people. So if you send them an email, they might be able to connect you to someone who can advise or assist you in your particular context.
Definitely. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to all of you about our experiences. You can find me on Facebook, with my name, Fernanda Garza. Also, my Atlas Corp email is fernanda.garza@atlascorp.org. And on social media like Twitter and Instagram are Fernanda Garza MX. And also, yeah, as Tushar said, if you need someone to talk to, if you have questions, if you still are not like feeling completely safe to talk about this, for whatever reason, I'm always here to help you out. And I have always lived by one phrase, which is "it gets better." So definitely check out the It Gets Better project in the United States. And they have international affiliates all over the world. So you can also talk to them and they are going to be able to help you and to connect you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the conversation. As Fernanda mentioned, there's many organizations around the world, so it's hard to point one, but I'm sure that there's local resources that people can reach out to. If you want to get in contact with me, well, I think that my name is on the invitation, Facebook invitation for this, but I'm on Twitter. You can look me up as Ernesto Celaya de Gonzalez. I'm sure I'll pop up. And if you are a fellow, always active on the fellowship Facebook group. So thank you.
Thank you so much as well. And it's always a privilege to come back to my family, to Atlas Corp family, and be able to talk to you and connect with all of you. If you want to reach me, my name is Hassan Kilani, and on Atlas Corp, I think you will find me on Facebook, as well as on Twitter, Hassan Amman. Amman is the name of my city, so Hassan Amman on Twitter, and I'm always available there. Thank you so much.
All right, well, again, thank you so much, and I hope it was, helpful and useful. Yes. I was so happy to meet you. And again, and everyone else, fellows can also contact me. So for support and any help. I'm currently in San Francisco, which is, just historical gay city. So yeah, thank you so much. And I think Kathy will help us to close the session. But